Hello, everybody. This is Patti Negri, and welcome to the Witching Hour. The Witching Hour, whatever time of day it is where I bring you magic and the best of the best of witchcraft, occultism, spirituality, and magic in all forms. And today I've got an amazing guest for you. I am so excited to really meet him and get to know him myself and get his book. But let me introduce you to Brandon Weston. He is a healer, writer, and folklorist who owns and operates Ozark Healing Traditions, an online collective of articles, lectures, and workshops focusing on Ozark Mountain region. As a practicing folk healer, his works with clients includes everything from spiritual cleanses to house blessings. He comes up from a long line of Ozark hillfolk and is also a folk herbalist, yarb doctor, and power doctor. You could visit him on ozarkhealing.com, but for now, let's get the real person, whether I can speak right now or not. Welcome. Thank you so much, Brandon, for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's great to be here.
I am so excited because I'm very elemental in my magic. I'm very earthy in my magic, but I'm sitting in the middle of Los Angeles in Hollywood. So were you born into this? Is this something how you were raised?
Not really. In the Ozarks, we have so many traditions and practices and beliefs and things like that, they just kind of become a part of the culture and you stop thinking about them. So I grew up, we'd never really talked about magic or anything like that, but we had home remedies. We had, ghost stories and stories that we would pass around. I had a great uncle who was a wart charmer. He could buy warts off of people. And so he would give you a nickel or a dime and the warts would disappear overnight, things like that. So there are a lot of these practices, traditions that have just been sort of ingrained in the culture for so long that they're just kind of commonplace. You don't really think about them. And that was kind of how it was with me growing up. And then I kind of, in college discovered the folklorists who had been studying the Ozarks, and everything just opened up. I had no idea that, the weird things my family was doing was, important or anybody might care about or connected to this larger tapestry of culture here. So for me, I kind of say, I did grow up with it, but I didn't grow up with it in the same way as, I'm talking about in the book. So, we talk a lot about magic, witchcraft, spells, things like that. And this is really sort of a modern way of looking at traditional practices from the Ozarks. Because traditionally, Ozark people didn't use the words magic, spells, things like that, because all of that was associated with evil. It was all associated with witchcraft. And all of that, of course, has changed over the years as the area has changed. But, this is a way for modern people using modern language, terms that like witch that we're reclaiming, things like that. Yes. I myself call myself a witch. But, I know the company that I can use that word in and, the people that maybe I can't use that word with. But yeah, so I grew up with it, but not in the way that maybe some people think.
Right. You weren't digging in the backyard. But do you find yourself, I mean, I could tell that you are yourself very gifted and intuitive in that you have the witch blood, as I call it. So it would make sense that you would be led there, whether you're in your backyard with your mom doing that or not.
Right.
I'm stuck on the wart doctor. That is great. Did that enough people have warts to get it magically taken off of them?
Well, I mean, used to my grandparents' generation, great grandparents, they lived mostly rural lives on farms and things like that. And if you're doing that sort of labor, you get a lot of warts. So when we look at the old Ozarks, we can see that there are a lot of wart doctors. There are a lot of blood stoppers. So if you have a bleeding wound, they know how to magically stop the wound. There were a lot of sort of chills and fever doctors, burn doctors. So it was all sort of related to the maladies and the afflictions that people would have commonly had at the time. And it's interesting to look at how even amongst traditional Ozark healers today, all of that stuff has kind of changed. People are starting to incorporate things like depression, anxiety, all of this other stuff, soul loss, or, all of these sort of spiritual problems. They're starting to work these more into their public life. Whereas before, traditional healers probably were healing in that way, but they were much more healing, the emergency stuff at the time.
Right. Well, in the moment, because they didn't have time for mental health care so much, probably.
Sure. Yeah.
So I love that, the very separation. So would a wart doctor be separate from the fever doctor, from the blood doctor, or did you have to have? So you just had your one specialty?
Well, there were generalists, and then there were also specialists. Generalists, there were several different names. Things like yarb doctor and power doctor, which are some of the old terms that I'm trying to get started again. You don't really hear them much anymore. But a yarb doctor specifically worked with yarbs, and yarbs is a dialect word for herbs, for plants. So a yarb doctor was an herbalist. They traditionally didn't work with any spells or charms or prayers or anything, although they may have their repertoire of prayers that they would say while they were preparing medicines and things like that. A power doctor, on the other hand, was the specialist in magical illnesses, removing curses, hexes, things like that. They worked with talismans, amulets, charms, verbal charms, prayers, spells, all of this sort of magical stuff. And then you also had specialists, and these were people that inherited maybe just one technique or one gift. So, for instance, the wart charmer, there were lots and lots and lots of different wart cures, but there may be one individual in town who specialized in removing warts, or, blowing the fire out of burns, as they say, removing the pain and the heat from a burn, or stopping blood, things like that. And a lot of times these were things that were passed down through families, and there's a lot of different traditions surrounding passing the gift, things like that. So yeah, you had specialists, then you also had the generalists. The granny woman is probably one of the more famous figures in Ozark folk tales and things like that. She was kind of an all-encompassing figure in the community. She was a midwife, she was an herbalist, she was a power doctor, worked with prayers, worked with charms and spells and things like that. And so she was really, in a lot of communities, there was always this sort of matriarch granny woman figure.
That's beautiful. And yes, we picture it in the woods. And excuse the barking. That is, I got our 5-minute limit with my pup Willow, I guess. So what are some of the, again, and I like that you bring it into the modern world. Even my book, Old World Magic for the Modern World. And, you don't have to go foraging for things so much. And I like even that you talk about the healing power of plants and prayers. That's how you enter the book. So what are some of your favorite, people are making a comeback into more natural, a lot of people into their medicines and their cures for things. What are some of your favorite healing plants that people could work, or herbs?
Well, two of my personal favorites, and they have a long history in Ozark folk magic and folk healing use, is sassafras. So root beer used to be flavored with sassafras root. So, if you smell sassafras root, you immediately get the sense of root beer, because they used to use it in it. It's a really good healing plant. It's been used here as a spring tonic for a long time. One of those plants that we inherited from the indigenous people in Appalachia when Ozark people were still a part of that culture. So it's according to Ozark usage, it cleans the blood, which is a euphemism for it being a laxative, not mild laxative. It goes back to the humoral theory. So the blood is connected to the liver and to the digestive system. So if you are able to cleanse or heal the digestive system and the liver, you are building your blood, or you're strengthening your blood. So a lot of times people would take sassafras tea in the spring as a spring tonic to help tonify their liver and their digestive system, and therefore their blood. It is an all-around just amazing plant. Medicinally, you can use the root, the leaves, the twigs, It's also got a lot of magical uses. It's a cleansing plant. It's associated with the element water. So you never want to burn sassafras. There's a lot of taboos around burning it. The legend is that if you burn sassafras wood in your fire, the sparks will catch your house on fire. So it's this magical plant that makes water, but not fire. But it's been used in cleansing rituals. So people would make baths with it, and even if they weren't taking it internally as a cleansing plant, they would be taking it externally to wash away general illnesses, but also hexes, curses, anything that might be sticking to the body. My other favorite plant is red cedar. It's actually not a cedar, it's a juniper. So it's Juniperus virginiana. And, European people in America have had a long history with juniper, going back to Scottish Highlands, to German areas. So they would have already had this love of juniper as a cleansing plant. It's a good smoke plant. So if you are, trying to get away from white sage, things like that, juniper is an amazing cleansing plant. And we have our native juniper here, red cedar. And so people would take it and they would use it as a fumigation for their house to help clear out negative energies, spirits. They would also use it in baths, so external cleansing rituals, things like that. I always like to say that there is a holy trinity of plants in the Ozarks, and that's red cedar, sassafras, and tobacco, because these three plants traditionally and today have been used to cure anything from skin disorders, fevers, chills, all the way up to severe possession and haunting and all of that stuff.
That is fabulous. So where would one, and again, I understand tobacco has been used, and I love that you staying away from sage. I try to stay away from too much sage. Sage, I think, has been overused and a little harsh for most things. What is your thoughts on sage? I would like your Ozark thoughts on it.
I'm a plant person, and so I'm all about responsibly harvesting plants. And I think that we're getting to the point where white sage is not being responsibly harvested. And my thoughts on it are that, there are a ton of plants out there that have these cleansing properties, and we can use plants that are in abundance. So my favorite cleansing for smokes, sort of smudge alternatives, are juniper or red cedar if you have it. Also, going back to Western and Northern European origins, mugwort and wormwood are both fantastic cleansing plants, and they're so abundant and they're so easy to grow. So if you enjoy growing plants, mugwort and wormwood and yarrow and mullein, all of these sort of Northern European plants are great cleansing plants. They're just as powerful as white sage. And I think, part of our work as, being connected to that natural flow of magic is being stewards of the natural world. And so I have a problem with, people overusing plants, taking until, there's nothing left. We're, as witches, we're stewards of the world. We're stewards of the earth. And I think that the part of how we can fit into that role is by monitoring how we use plants, where we get the plants from, making sure that they're sustainably harvested and things like that.
Thank you for that. I agree wholeheartedly. And I have heard about the harvesting of the sage and everything. I really gave it up years ago. And I use a lot of mugwort and wormwood and things like that myself. So where would somebody, I've never used sassafras for anything. So where would I get sassafras if I'm like, I need some sassafras?
So it's pretty widely available online. All of the big sort of herb sellers out there that do bulk herbs will have sassafras. In the 80s, I think, the FDA banned sassafras in commercial products because it does contain a chemical called safrole, which they did lab tests on, and the lab rats that they used the safrole with grew tumors on their liver. So they banned anything containing safrole. I always give a caveat to this study because there hasn't been any studies done since the 80s that I know of. and it was highly concentrated amounts. Most of the time, people using sassafras as a tea or something like that, you're not going to get enough of the saffrol for it to actually cause harm. Traditionally, in the Ozarks, it was a spring tonic, which means you use it, you may take a dose of 3 cups a day for a week, but then you don't use it after that. So it's a powerful plant, it's a powerful medicine, but we have to, give it respect. And part of giving it respect is, using it for a short time to tonify the body and then letting it go for a while. And then, if you get sick, you may use it again. But yeah, sassafras is available online. Red cedar is less available, but it does grow throughout pretty much all of eastern United States. And of course, you can always substitute juniper, and you can even substitute juniper berries, which are very common. But they're both juniper plants. So I for me, nothing smells better than some crushed juniper berries on an incense charcoal. Just like, I don't know, there's something about that cleansing smoke that is so good.
I agree. I used a lot of juniper, but we have that here out west, so
Yeah.
that's in the backyard. So what are some of the things that you talk about in your book for people that they can do, like on a day-to-day, to make your life better or healthier or more magical?
A lot of what I focus on in the book, and then also workshops and lectures and things like that I do, is really showing people the sort of magical mindset of the Ozarks. And we kind of have a unique approach to magic and spirituality, in that traditionally people that have worked in this system have been incredibly poor. They've lived in the hills and hollers without a lot of external things. And so the practices reflects that, in that there aren't a lot of specialized tools that are used. More often than not, you're repurposing household objects. So that's one thing I like to teach people is, as a magical person, as I was taught, one of my teachers told me, she said, you should be able to do everything you need to do in a completely empty jail cell. And that's always been a good metaphor that stuck with me. This idea that, the power is within us. The tools and the timings and the ingredients, things like that are, they help focus that power. They help enhance that power. But ultimately, everything comes from our own intention, our own power. And so I always like to talk to people about, what sort of things around your house can you use in your magic? Traditionally in the Ozarks, people have used everything from axes to knives to scissors, all of which can magically cut hexes and curses off of people. We've used things like brooms, ordinary brooms, to sweep the body clean of illness and hexes and things like that, using candles that you have around the house in your practice, or oil lamps are really popular here in the Ozarks, and it's kind of an old-timey thing. So lots of oil lamps around. So, putting prayers in your oil lamps so that the light illuminates those prayers and intentions. So I think getting into this sort of mindset that, I guess the simple nature of magic. And part of that is this idea that there's a natural magic in the world around us. And the gifted individual is somebody who can tap into that natural magic. But it's already everywhere, and it's already inside of us too. It's just a matter of, discovering it, of locating it and being able to use it. So a lot of our rituals, spells, prayers, things like that from the outside, they seem very simple, but they're far from simplistic. They're often very complicated in their nature. And so I think that's one of the big things is kind of giving magical practitioners, modern magical practitioners, a different way of thinking about their practice. Personally, growing up, I was really interested in a lot of different magical traditions, witchcraft, things like that. But I always found myself hitting different walls because I never understood really why I needed certain things. So why did I need a blade consecrated under the Aries full moon on a Tuesday, that sort of thing. And of course, I mean, in my book, I talk about how magical timings can enhance your work, things like that. But at the end of the day, the core, the heart of the power is in you, is in your connection to this sort of natural flow. And that's always been a big part of Ozark life in general, is this idea that, there's a strong connection between the individual and the natural world. And that natural world is in and of itself spiritual.
That's beautiful. So how much of it do you work elementally? Because I noticed you talked about you don't burn sassafras because it's water element, it goes to water. Are you consciously going, okay, air and fire and water and earth and working that within to your spell workings, or it's the story that goes with the herb or whatever itself? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense.
Yeah.
I personally work with a lot of different sort of, like I was talking about earlier, with timings, things like that, using certain zodiac moon days, which is also a very traditional Ozark way of working. Farmers even use the moon days plant by the signs, as they call it. So personally, I use elements in formulating sort of spells and things like that. Because the sort of Ozark folk magic is got this simplistic nature to it, or simplified nature, a lot of times practitioners work in a very dynamic way, meaning they don't necessarily have a set ritual that they might do, but they may determine the auspices. So they may read the signs or do a divination to determine what sort of elemental work needs to be done in that time. Normally, it works on a system of opposites. So, for instance, if you are diagnosing a person who has been cursed and you determine that the curse is in a part of the body that is associated with water or with a certain zodiac sign that is a water element, you may formulate a ritual that is the opposite of that. So you may do a ritual that involves fire or smoke or something like that. The idea is that whenever you're working against a certain influence, you don't want to use the same influence. So, for instance, when people are healing by the zodiac moon signs, there's every part of the body corresponds to a certain zodiac sign. And so, for instance, if you have a fever, it's in the head, that's Aries. So you want to work opposite of that, which is Libra. And so because Aries is fire, you might incorporate the Libra element, air, as a way of countering that influence. The idea being that if you work with the same element or the same zodiac sign, you're only building that.
Right.
You're adding fuel to the fire, so to speak. So yeah, I work with elemental properties a lot in formulating these rituals. And that's another thing that I kind of want to try and teach people, is the idea that it's good to have certain rituals that by heart, your intention is in it, you don't have to keep flipping to the page, that sort of thing. Having those a part of your life is really good, but it's also really important to be able to flow with the situation too. So especially if you're working for clients, for other people, being able to diagnose and formulate spells specifically for this person, that is powerful work. So that's I go into that in the book, but I have lectures and things like that about it as well. My hope is that at some point in the future, I do have a book coming out next year. It's a spell book, the Ozark Mountain spell book. It's a grimoire of spells and rituals and all sorts of stuff. But after that, I really want to do a sort of formulary spell book where I go into how to formulate based upon diagnosis. So, what zodiac signs you need to use to oppose certain forces, what elements you need to use to oppose certain forces, things like that. So that's one of those areas that I really nerd out on. One of my favorite things to do is formulate magical timings for people, for clients and things like that. So being able to determine the proper time of day proper day of the week, zodiac moon sign, phase of the moon, down to, you know, this perfect time period for doing pretty much any work.
That is beautiful. And I love everything is very elemental of this earth and of spirit there. Now, does Ozark Mountain Magic in itself get into deity at all? Do you work with God or gods? Or is it pretty much just what's in the plant, what's in the sun sign? I mean,
Ozarkers have always had an interesting relationship with religion and spirituality. You know, we've been viewed as being very conservative for a long time. And in reality, that's probably only about 70 years old. You know, Ozarkers have been in the Ozarks since about 1810 or so. Up until about 1940, 1930, Ozarkers had spirituality, they had religion that they connected to, but it was much more simplified. It was, folklorists have commented on the fact that Ozarkers outwardly were very religious, but not prudish. So you have stories about farmers rolling naked on their fields as fertility rituals and things like that. So there's always been this kind of interesting relationship with spirituality. In general, you know, this natural magic in the world can be experienced in a lot of different ways. There are still a lot of traditional workers that connect to this idea of God, like a monotheistic God. Mm-hmm. Some connect to the idea of divinity and almost like pantheistic sort of God in everything view. And of course, now there are a lot of different views. I know rural people who are, pagans, neo-pagans, druids. So there's a lot of different views. But traditionally, this magic in the world manifests in a lot of different ways, and one of the ways it manifests is in otherworldly entities. So, traditional people, church-going people, have also worked with the little people who are our fairies. So there's lots of traditions around healers and magical practitioners who have derived power or certain works from the other world. From the world of not only, spirits of the dead, but spirits of the land. And then, of course, our fairies. So I would say that the relationship with the spirit world has been overwhelmingly animistic rather than a sort of deity relationship. In a lot of cases, the old stories and, this approach to religion, it was that God was almost an animistic spirit in the world in and of itself, that, every plant contained a piece of God, things like that. And so it's interesting to bring that out through the book and through the lectures and stuff, because I think that, there's been a lot of very stereotypical views of the Ozarks, like Appalachia as well, the sort of backward conservative sort of stuff. And I really like showing people that, there's a lot more to the story than has been portrayed.
Right. Yeah, people are. I love that. I'm liking this more and more and more, because I don't like to get deity in my work with people and stuff, because now you're going to clash with whatever their belief system. But people understand the magic in nature and herbs and roots and trees and even fairies.
Yeah, and also ancestral spirits too. Ancestors have always been a really important part of Ozark culture. People might just not refer to them as ancestors, but there's, even amongst very conservative people, there's this idea that the other world, the world of spirits, is constantly present. So our, ancestral spirits, Granny and Grandpa, are here watching over us as angels, every day or whatever. But this idea that the spirit world is always around us, it's always present around us, and we can work with that, we can benefit from that. And so I like to work with people, a lot of the people I work with, they don't want to get into the religion thing, and I don't either personally. But that, everybody is always excited about doing ancestor work, because, this is your bloodline. These are it doesn't matter what you necessarily believe in, but you have these loved ones who have passed on, and they are willing to work with you, or maybe add some magic power to your work, things like that. And so I've found that's a way to sort of get into the spiritual side of magic without, bringing up the diversity of religion.
Right. I love that. I can't wait to get this book. So in this work, so if we're going Ozark folk magic, Ozark, it is what it is. You're out there and you're doing the work. You don't necessarily have, here's your altar, or you do, or you don't, or is that part of it, or that's kept separate?
So a personal altar, or
Well, yeah. Do you have a personal altar? Do you have your healing altar? Again, we're staying away from deity. We're staying away from all of that.
Yeah. So what I like to have in my home, I like I said with the ancestors, I always like to have an ancestor area in my home, and I always like to have something outside to honor the land spirits, because Ozarkers, we have a very tumultuous relationship with the land here, because we are settlers, we're colonizers here. And so I always like to have a land altar to honor the spirits that came before me, the spirits that came before Ozarkers, even these ancient spirits that are here. So yeah, those are two things that I always like to have, and those are things that I always encourage my students to have too. So setting up an ancestor altar is automatically going to connect you to a lot of different important ideas within magical traditions. So the idea of having a patron or an ally, these otherworldly spirits that can sort of help filter out certain energies while you're learning your process, while you're getting started. So having an ancestor altar, and also having an altar or an area outside for the land spirits. And normally I always like feeding the animals. So I feed the birds, I feed the squirrels, things like that, as an extension of the land. So feeding them, and they're, feeding the spirits along with it. So those are the two things that are really important to me. I have a room where I do my work with clients, things like that. But, it's pretty simple, because the way I work is in this sort of simplified way. I don't have a lot of specialized items, and the items that I do have that are specialized are all sort of nature based. So in the Ozarks, magical practitioners and healers have traditionally always been drawn to auspicious natural things. So for instance, hagstones or whole stones are, people will string them up for good luck. I use them in my practice. Also whole roots, so roots that form natural holes, are used in a lot of different rituals and things like that. So these sort of weird natural things figure into a lot of Ozark folk work. So I keep those around. And those are probably the only specialized things I have, apart from, a few things that people have given to me. But I obviously don't discourage, more complicated work or anything like that. There's times where my work becomes a little bit more complicated depending on the situation. Ozark folk magic is all about going with the flow. And if the flow is taking you in a more ritualized, complicated way, then go. See where it's taking you. I think that's one of the big things that surprises people when they've read the book or they hear me talk or anything, is this idea, that it's so laid back. And yeah, it really is, because it's this idea that you don't need to complicate things, really. It's about connecting to something that's already there. You don't have to find it. It's already there. You just have to recognize it.
Exactly. You are just talking, and almost every question. I mean, this is how I work. And I go for simplicity myself, almost always. And again, excuse my dog in the background.
Okay.
She's possessed. Not really. I have to stop saying that. I am so fascinated. I have so many questions. You are so intuitive. Every question I had, you answered it before I asked it. You would go right into, I'd go, what is a yarb thinking I'm going to ask? And you would say right into it. So, so I can mute myself for a second. I have so many questions. So you'll have to come back as we're looking at time. Will you come back another time
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
teach us more magic?
I mean, I could talk all day about this. So yeah, this has been an area, I mean, obviously a passion project of mine. It's a part of my heritage, things like that. But my main goal with all of this has been revitalizing a culture that has been sort of forgotten for quite a while. And so I'm always excited to talk about it, and I would love to come back.
Okay, so you are coming back. So for right now, people, tell them about your book, tell them where they can find you and work with you, social media. Where can people find Brandon?
Yeah, so I have a book out from Llewellyn Worldwide, Ozark Folk Magic, Plants, Prayers, and Healing. And it came out in January. I have another book coming out next summer, the Ozark Mountain Spell Book. It's going to be a book of rituals, recipes, spells, basically everything that I couldn't put into the first book because of space. So it's going to be a really good companion guide. For more information about me, you can go to ozarkhealing.com. That's my main website. Any virtual lectures, in-person workshops, or anything that I do, I'll post on the website. But I also have a Facebook page, Ozark Healing Traditions, and an Instagram at Ozark Healing Traditions, and a Twitter, Ozark Healing. And I post on workshops and everything across my social media platform. I do have a workshop coming up in December. It's going to be the last one for the year. It's a virtual lecture, and it's going to be about Ozark Bible magic. So using the Bible as a spell book, that sort of thing.
Oh, that's fascinating. Okay, and they'll find that on your social media, on your website.
Yep.
Well, I'm excited to get the book. I'm excited to try your magic. I love your energy. Now next I'm going to go to the Ozarks for the first time, somewhere in there. So thank you, everyone. Check him out. Brandon Weston, Ozark Magic everywhere. So thank you so much for being part of the Witching Hour.
Thank you.